Hi, Ginny.
I just hit the record button. Is it recording? Yes, it's recording. And now present. Okay. Zoe and Jim, we have 47 people who registered. So.
Oh wow.
Mm-hmm. If Karen, you and I, between you and I, if we can monitor the chat and the Q&A.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to get started in a few minutes. We'll just let people sign in.
And it's been so long, Ginny.
Oh, I need to.
Oh, wait. Can folks see, if I opened up the chat, can you actually see the chat when you see my chat or the chat box pop up in the screen?
Do I see my chat? I'm going to move it off to the side.
Yeah, I see the chat too.
Okay, I'm going to.
Where you are? Not really.
Juby,
Yes.
just have a question about tracking time. I'm pretty passionate about this story and I know I can go on. So will you be a timekeeper for me? I've got 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And is there some way you can give me sort of a notice at the 8-minute mark so I can, or what would you suggest around that?
I could set my phone off and you'll just hear like a little beep and they'll tell you that you have 2 more minutes.
Okay.
But we're a little bit flexible on this, you know.
I know,
Yeah.
but I'm going to get my battery clean. Come over with you, Richie. Would you like a little snack of peas and eggs?
We'll just get started in maybe a minute or two. Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, let's just give it one more minute.
Okay, sounds great. And we're recording this as well, so folks can catch it at some other point.
That's right. And we'll be saving the chat at the end. So we'll have that as well.
This is always so awkward because normally during a live and in person, you can kind of chat and banter, just silence for a bit.
Just glad I can't see myself. It's just.
Well, you all look great, so.
We are a beautiful group, aren't we?
Okay. I wonder if we should get started. What do you think?
I think it's time.
Okay. Yay. Let me make sure my. Okay. Great. I wanted to make sure that I could actually change the slides. Okay. Maybe I'll get started with my part. So thanks everyone for joining us at our food security in Hamilton and COVID-19. Here is our agenda or schedule that we had kind of laid out. We are recording this. We're in a webinar mode, so you can see the 5 of us, and you're muted, and we unfortunately can't see you, but we have looked at the guest list, and there's some folks that we know and some friends. So thank you for our new friends and our old friends to join us today. This is what we're going to do today. We really got together, Karen and I, we were just talking about food security, what the scene looked like, especially during COVID, and just thought, we wanted to pull out some good news stories, some heartening stories, despite all the weightiness of this pandemic. There's some really great things still happening in our city because of some fantastic folks. And yeah, we just wanted to welcome you officially. What we'll do is we've got a couple of things. We're going to do a land acknowledgement. Karen is going to talk a little bit about evolution of food and climate change. Both Karen and I are going to give updates on the respective organizations that we work for. And then our three panelists, Zoe, Deborah, and Jim, will speak. And after each panelist goes, we'll have a Q&A specifically for that panelist, and then we'll open it up to a larger conversation at the end. And that will be our webinar. So I'll hand it off to you, Karen.
All right, thank you very much, Juby. It's really great to be together again, Juby. It's been a long time since we worked together at Environment Hamilton. I was there for about 6 years as a project manager. We did great stuff with Eat Local, from the food map to the Good Food Box and beyond. Right now I'm with St. Matthew's House doing some food security work over there. And so glad that we could collaborate in a bit of a throwback. Remember, February is Farm Month, some of you may. Back around, was it 2010, we started doing events every February, getting people together across the city, listening to experts, artists, all kinds of people talking about environmental issues together. And I don't know, maybe something about the pandemic brought on a fit of nostalgia, but I thought let's do another February's Farm Month event. So we snuck it in February 28th. So land acknowledgement is a great way to begin, but I'd like to actually begin with a word about land acknowledgements. I was inspired to do this because of something I read that had been posted by the Ontario Federation of Labour. I'd like to share with you that Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other ingredients, agreements, food on the brain ingredients, such as land purchases by the Crown signed between 1781 and 1930. Treaties are legally binding agreements that set out the rights, responsibilities, and relationships of First Nations and federal and provincial governments. Acknowledging territory shows recognition of and respect for Aboriginal peoples. It is recognition of their presence both in the past and in the present. Recognition and respect are essential elements establishing healthy reciprocal relations, and these relationships are the key to reconciliation. However, acknowledging territory is only the beginning of cultivating strong relationships with Canada's First Peoples. We, that's the Ontario Federation of Labour, we encourage you to take action on truth and reconciliation, read the Truth and Reconciliation final report and consider how you can support the calls to action, outreach to your local Native Friendship Centre, invite a speaker to your next meeting to talk about truth and reconciliation, acknowledge Indigenous territory at all of your meetings, and reach out and forge partnerships with local Indigenous communities and organizations, sponsor and promote Indigenous events and advocacy. With those words in mind, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. This one comes from the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. It begins. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, that is North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our role as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. Also, as a note, we stand in solidarity with murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, transgender, and two-spirit people. All right, so I did mention back in the day when I was with Environment Hamilton and hosting events throughout the city, and one of them was about the subject of food and climate change. At that time, when I Googled food and climate change, I was shocked to not have a lot of responses. In fact, almost none. Did lots of I dug deeper, still couldn't find information. I was even reading Elizabeth May's Climate Change for Dummies, and there was not one mention of the food system. Yet since that time, it is an issue that has come to the forefront. There's a lot of academic work. There's education that's available on the subject. And I think we all need to understand that ignoring the link between food and climate change sets us at a disadvantage when it comes to dealing with it. It was said fairly commonly a few years ago that climate change and food are related, and that our food system accounts to 15 to 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. But I've also heard, and I remember Vandana Shiva, the environmentalist and scientist, talking about food and climate change. And she said it's actually a much higher figure when you take into account all aspects of the food system. So it's more like 30 to 35% of global greenhouse emissions come from the way that we plant, harvest, protect, ship, process all of our food. And you have to take into account what happens when that food is leaving the supermarkets and all the car trips, getting that food into homes, the energy that's used to prepare the food and store the food there, and then the greenhouse gas emissions that come about because of the waste in our food system. And we know we could have a whole webinar on that subject and more quite easily. But I did decide to have an event, and I thought I'd bring in one of my food gurus. And it's somebody who has passed away recently, and it's Dr. Wayne Roberts, who was the chair of the Toronto Food Policy Council, and really as an individual was instrumental in bringing the subject of food policy councils to a global audience so that they exist all over the world now. Wayne as a person was loved by many in the food movement, but in also social justice movements in Toronto. He was involved with Toronto community housing, promoting community gardens in his capacity as food policy council chair. He even piloted the food trucks experiment that happened in front of Toronto City Hall. He did so much. I would recommend, if you're new to the subject of food security, that you grab a copy of the most recent version of it. Actually, let me just grab it for you from my shelf. There we go. The No Nonsense Guide to World Food. It'll take you a day or two to read. Great information and background about how all of this connects, whether we're talking about local food systems, regional, global food security. So anyway, I did have this event at McMaster University, and Wayne was one of the guest speakers, as was Juji Fodor, who was a local food activist who's gone on to do wonderful things at the University of British Columbia. And so the three of us and their audience of about 7 got together to explore the subject. There was this really memorable moment when Wayne talked about the importance of solutions that are interconnected, and the beauty of solutions to one problem actually taking care of maybe 2 or 3 other problems, elegant solutions. And I think this is key to the challenge and the opportunity that's facing us right now as we deal with not just COVID-19 and its social, environmental, economic impacts, but also view it in the broader context of we have to deal with climate change. And I know as human beings, we have the ingenuity, we just need the drive to get all of us working together to come up with those solutions. I'm seeing great work done at City of Hamilton. The nonprofit sector, of course, is right in there leading the charge and working with the public. The academic institutions are doing their part. And when you listen to somebody like Mark Carney, who's returned to Canada, a former governor of the Bank of Canada. He did that over in the UK. Now he's back here. When he talks about the importance of the private sector getting on board for creating change, it just underlines the fact that this is far-reaching and we can't ignore this chance to make things better. Anyway, I think I've talked really quite long enough. I'd like to give Juby a turn to talk about what's going on at Environment Hamilton with regard to their work.
Yes, did you want to explain this This really,
I probably should explain this, shouldn't I? When I was looking for that old poster for the food and climate change event at NAC, I was looking for the specific image that was on the poster. It was a cow standing in a flooded field. The cow looked really quite sad and emaciated. And it was just, to me, it encapsulated a lot of the horror of the potential scenarios that we were facing. Couldn't find that, but I did find this. And I think it is so eloquent. It says so much. It is, I need to acknowledge the artist who created it. The polar bear hamburger was made as part of the Climate Weirding Project. It seems to be affiliated with Cornell University with contributions from students in various disciplines. And this sculpture was made by Vincent J.F. Huang, who was born in 1971, so relatively younger than I am. This was created back in 2014. Again, it's about looking at those connections, the links between what does a polar bear have to do with the food on our plate. Just some food for thought for you all. Thanks, Juby.
yeah. So before we have our amazing panelists speak and do their presentations, both Karen and I will talk a bit about what both our organizations are working on during this pandemic. So I work at Environment Hamilton, and as you know, Karen, well, as many of you know, Karen works at St. Matthew's House, and both organizations have co-sponsored this webinar. So during the pandemic, Environment Hamilton continues our advocacy work. Our executive director, Dr. Linda Lukasic, is here and has been leading the charge on important work on freezing our urban boundary. The city of Hamilton is currently undertaking a land needs assessment to determine how much land is needed to accommodate urban growth up to the year 2051. The draft land needs assessment puts forward two scenarios for accommodating that growth. Both gobble up substantial amounts of prime agricultural farmlands. And despite the calls from community and despite declaring a climate emergency, the city planning staff and consultants did not offer a no boundary expansion option for the public to consider. We are in danger of losing huge tracts of prime agricultural farmlands to urban expansion. The final recommendation regarding our land needs assessment will go to Planning Council or to our planning committee and to our council in March. So it's very timely. Meanwhile, we know that the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, that climate change action needs to be swift and significant over the next decade if we are to have any hope of averting extreme climate impacts. This is why Environment Hamilton is calling for our council to freeze our urban boundary. We have a petition on our website, environmenthamilton.org. You can go to the take action and the sprawl petition is there. If you've already signed it, please share it. These planning decisions are permanent and we can't eat houses. And if you would like more information about sprawl and what our vision is, what Environment Hamilton's vision is, if we freeze our urban boundary, what our city could look like, we have a couple of webinars on Environment Hamilton's YouTube channel. In terms of food security, we need our prime agricultural farmlands. Houses become the final crop in our farm fields. So now I'm going to pass it over to Karen to talk about her work at St. Matthew's House.
Yes, I started working at St. Matthew's House in 2018, and I was cooking for seniors. It was wonderful. We were making lunch and breakfast for them Mondays to Fridays, and this was located at the Eva Rockville Community Center. For the seniors in attendance, it was a daily drop-in, and it was for more than just the food. It was a place for people to gather, to break isolation, to find fellowship with one another, to share gossip, to watch movies together, to listen to music, to learn crafts. It's a very special place, and food was a part of it. Time spent in the kitchen for me was very rewarding. Gave me a chance to connect with somebody like Ginny, who was doing great community food work. And this was going on until about a year ago. I won't forget the day, March 15th, when we found out that our senior center would be closing due to COVID-19. And the problem for staff was, how are we going to continue to support people in our community? These are vulnerable seniors with limited access to food. Well, we wouldn't be able to open the senior center to to them anymore, but we were able to continue to provide food. We started doing food deliveries. We were taking them to the doors of seniors because of the disruption to transit, to the disruption to supermarkets. Remember a year ago, and we were terrified about going out and buying food and worrying about having to scrub our cans and our produce down before we could consume it. It was a frightening time. The organization was able to, the P word, let's say it, pivot, and change those services to ones that were accessible through a different way. And we've continued to evolve our services as a result. I have to say that one of the inspirations was the food group at Ginny. I'm so surprised you're on this call. It's delightful. I got an idea because the seniors would often come to the kitchen, and you know how kitchens tend to be the heart of the home, and it's where people gather during parties. Well, the kitchen was like that for the seniors. Sometimes if they just wanted a quiet space, they wanted a friendly ear, if they wanted to do something with their hands instead of just sitting upstairs feeling like they weren't making a contribution, they would come to the kitchen. So it just points to the power of food to promote wellness in a community. So anyway, the idea I had, this is actually before COVID, was to bring seniors to the kitchen to teach them food skills, for me to learn food skills from them, because learning is so powerful when it's interactive, and contribute to the sustainability of the project to keep up with the food production as the group was growing. And we were able to receive funding to carry out this food programming for folks. We would be cooking together. COVID made that impossible, but the funder was able to work with us. So we changed it to something that we would deliver in a safe setting with City of Hamilton Housing through Community Hamilton Housing and our partner there, Brenda Silverthorne, basing this operation at First Place. I think you're familiar with it. It's a King and Wellington, that high rise. It contains housing for seniors. There's a rooftop garden where we plan to carry on some gardening activities, depending on COVID, of course. So we also developed a program growing out of that to encourage seniors at other City Hamilton housing sites to cook their own food. So we developed this program. We called it Seniors in Kitchens, or SINKs for short. And we extended that by creating a food delivery program to those building sites. We are working in collaboration with City and also an organization based in Halton Region called Food for Life. And they were providing food that was above and beyond the quality of what would normally be found in food bank food. Typically in the food banks, the food is shelf stable, it's packaged, it's processed, it's cheap as possible, tends to be high in sodium. There's, so there's the one benefit of filling bellies, but that food is not adequate for nourishing people. This is where a program like Good Food Box comes in, because it makes fresh produce available at a much more reasonable price. Through Food for Life, we were able to reach these vulnerable communities with fresh ingredients. We're bringing them milk and eggs and cheese, and Tim Hortons was donating sandwiches. So it became a whole community effort. We were able to pilot this in November. We did it twice and we had to stop because we went into code red. We found that it was difficult to maintain safe distancing between seniors. We were able to have a hard time maintaining distance between the seniors and ourselves. So we had to shut this down. So even though the organization has made great inroads and has been able to change the way we operate to accommodate COVID-19 and its threats, it still is imposing limits. We're still waiting to go back out in that community. We may need to change where we do the gardening. So there are problems, there are solutions, but we're still working it out, but we have to do it as a community. So I'm really happy to be part of that. And I thank St. Matthew's House for co-sponsoring this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Yeah, there's just so much. Normally when we're, organizing a project or doing some work, there are things you need to think about, but this extra layer around COVID and safety protocols, and people have to feel safe as well if they're participating. Yeah, lots of things to think about. Yes. Okay. So I think we're going to get started with hearing from our panelists. So this webinar is really focused on some good news that have emerged despite the pandemic. We want to talk about some positive things that have happened. We just I think we just need more good news out there. And this webinar is hopefully going to do that, and I know it will. So our first panelist is a young farmer who I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to know more during this pandemic, Zoe Hayes. I'm going to read some of her words. Having gone down several paths, I found myself returning again and again to work with plants as work that is sustaining. Most recently collaborating with friends to form a collectively run and evolving seed, medicinal herb, and food farm in Hamilton, where we are experimenting with ways to share our harvest. Our farm is curious about how to center pleasure and abundance in the work of farming, which for all of us right now means working other jobs and doing farming on the side. It also means maintaining a curiosity and a desire to be creative and finding a way to grow food, medicine, and seeds, and to build a farm that is centered on reciprocity, informed by relationships, and based in mutual aid. Zoe, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us. So Zoe, I'll just go through, I've got the slides, I'll just go through them. You just let me know when to.
Okay,
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you for having me. I feel very new to all this, as hearing about everyone else's experience and what they've done and the work that they've done in food and food security. So this is my farm team plus friends, which is also the farm team. Yeah, I guess just a bit about myself. I'm pretty new to Hamilton. I've been here about 5 years now and been farming for about the past 4 years. And yeah, that's evolved into this project this summer that I was working on with 3 other friends. And this was us sort of at the end of our season, clearing out the fields and the produce that we were going to donate at the end of the season. So a little bit about, should I describe the people first? So basically, this is the farm, which was my friend Jessica Gale had a business here called Sweet Gale Gardens, and she ran a flower farming business for 7 years. About 5 or 6 years was at this farm, which is the Earth to Table farm just in Flamborough. Last year or this year, she decided to not run the business as a business, but we decided we wanted to keep farming and keep doing something on the land. And we started to move towards growing seeds last season. So we wanted to do a bit more of that and kind of just figured, okay, well, we'll grow what we can to sustain the farm. It won't be really a job, but we'll be able to still be out there. We can grow food for ourselves and our friends. And then that was sort of like, November, end of the season, the year before. And then, COVID came along and we were like, we have access to this land, the ability to grow. We have all the supplies there from her business. And, there's real questions around food security that are coming up around what are people going to be able to access and how are they going to be able to access it. And so 2 of our friends, Leanne and Erin, also had various farm experiences, were interested in growing and decided to join us. And we tried to figure out a way to kind of make it work with our other schedules to be able to grow some food and just be curious about what we can do with that food and how we can share it. As I said, I think some of the main things that brought us together were the idea of relationships and how do we build relationships as a way of doing the work in the community that we want to be doing, that we want to be sustaining and built over time. And also, how do we share the abundance that we are able to receive from growing food, and specifically starting to grow seeds, just realizing how much abundance there is in that process, and that there's always more than enough to share. So how do we share that in a way that is respectful with other people and building relationships with other people. And yeah, so you could go to the next slide. So this is just kind of, didn't have great pictures of the whole farm, but basically the farm is about well, we have a 2-acre plot, but 1 acre is in cover crop, and then probably just slightly less than an acre that we were actually growing. So we had some perennial flowers that were that Jess had been growing before, some perennial medicinal herbs, which we had been growing. And then there's the one hoop house there, and then there's another hoop house down the road a little bit that we were growing in. Yeah, so let's see what else. So yeah, the main things that we were growing were that we're able to kind of sustain the farm, because we were kind of always trying to have this balance between like, okay, we also want to, and this is something that Juby, it'll come up later, but Juby really was really helpful in also thinking about is like, how do we run this in a way that like is sustaining for us and that is not like completely depleting of our energy, and that we can maintain that joy in the farming, which is why we're here, but also share the harvest. So finding ways to make money that allowed us to keep doing the work. We were able to grow the medicinal herbs, selling those wholesale, and then getting a few seed contracts, so selling to seed companies, and then a bit of wholesale veggies and fruits were kind of what made it so that we could sustain the work. So you can go on. Oh yeah, so there's the other hoop house down there. Yeah, and then we just basically started in our basements growing all the seedlings last spring, which was like really joyful in March when we, were stuck inside. So that's how it all began. And then go to the next, Juby. And then I just kind of thought I would share a little bit about some of the things that were great discoveries for me of how some ways that, the abundance of especially seed production. So we, in the hoop house, we grew a couple different types of lettuce for seed production. And one of the things we realized is like, you'll see on the picture on the right, like that's the lettuce just before we harvested it for seed. It gets really big. So you actually would tend to space it much further than you would if you were growing it to eat. So we were able to plant as much closer together in the beginning and then harvest as we went. And then we ended up with the space that we would need at the end for the seed, which was kind of a cool discovery. So that was one of the things we harvested. You could go to the next. Just wanted to share some of the tomatoes abundance. So tomato seed, again, like you can just blend up the seed and then or blend up the tomato and then harvest the seed from that. But we were able to actually like save tons and tons of tomatoes that we froze. And that's one thing that we didn't really do a lot of donation of that, because trying to figure out like distribution of frozen products is much more challenging. So something we're hoping to explore more, but you can go on, Juby. These are some of the other things that we were able to harvest. So we did a lot of pepper seeds as well. And again, you harvest the seed and then you get the pepper flesh. And so we did a lot of canning and freezing of peppers. And also one of the seed crops that we did was the California poppy, which is a medicinal herb, really amazing for the nervous system, for sleep, anxiety. And we were able to harvest some of the flowers and leaves throughout the season. And then because you wait until they go to seed, you can also harvest at that time. It's the perfect time to harvest the roots. So we harvested all the roots at the same time as we harvested the seeds. And so we have, over the year, we're drying also a lot of the medicinal herbs to share with our community and with people, specifically shared with oh, is that time?
That's your 2-minute warning.
Okay, cool. Okay, we can keep going to the next one. And then this is a project that Juby developed, and we developed in collaboration with Juby, which was a mini CSA project. So it was a great way to get some of the produce directly to people. So the concept was to have food that was locally grown, organically grown, and from local farms to people that might not be able to access that food at full price. So GB had a grant that was able to supplement some of the cost, and then people paid like a low cost for the box, which we did every other week for about 5 or 6 weeks, I think. And so it was really fun because we hadn't really planned to grow a ton of food for a ton of people, but there was 5 different families or individuals in this, and we were able to kind of give a mix of small amounts of what we had available at the time. And it was a way of also connecting to people in the city who might not have the opportunity to be at a farm to see what some of those different options were of what we had growing there. And we were able to give them some flowers and medicinal herb tea bundles and herb bundles. So it was really fun. And I thought it was a really interesting idea that Juby came up with, and keeping it really small was also great because it was really able to be really personal as well. And then the other place that we were able to donate a bunch of food, this was our last harvest. We did a couple donations to some friends of ours at Six Nations that have a community food box program and community garden. They do some really amazing projects. And so we would bring the food up there and they would basically post it to their community. And the next day, like it would all be gone. People would just come and grab the food. And that was a really amazing partnership that we hope to continue with that. And then, yeah, these are just the seeds I thought I would end with. These are some of our nasturtium seeds. And yeah, and just thinking about the future, I think the other place that we donated some of the food was to caremongering in Hamilton. So one seed from that is that this year we're hoping to support them to start a community garden project so they can add food. They're a group that does food deliveries to people in Hamilton that started during last March when people couldn't get out to grocery stores. And so, yeah, so we're hoping to help them to be able to provide more fresh food to their boxes. We were able to donate some from last year, and they would like to also start building capacity within their community of growing. And so we're exploring some of that and then hoping to just do more this year with what we did last year.
Amazing. I was wondering, Karen, if you could help me with the Q&A. Yes, let's give a moment. Thank you, Zoe. Those photos were beautiful and the produce is amazing. Do you mind, Karen, just looking at the chat if there are questions for Zoe? We can do that now.
Yeah, I'll watch that. I just have one quick question to begin with, Zoe. How did you connect with the caremongering community? Did they reach out to you or did you reach out to them? I missed that.
So I was volunteering with them since like the beginning of the pandemic. I heard about them when they started, and I'm not a great Facebook user. They started out on Facebook, but then as they kind of started to build, I just tried to help however I could. I just think I think the way that they're doing kind of mutual aid as the way that they're doing their work is something that I'm really interested in. I really value the way that they've done that. So I've just kept kind of putting bugs in their ears of like, if you ever want to work with farmers or find a way to try and get more produce into your boxes, then I'd love to help. So I think that it'll be exciting to see where that goes.
Yeah, so beautiful on so many levels. And I'm a big fan of building urban and rural connections. So this just speaks to my passion for that kind of work. Beautifully done, Zoe. Thank you.
So there's a couple of questions, one from Deborah. How do you find like-minded people who are willing to get involved?
Yeah. So the people that I was working with were all friends that I'd had over the years. And I think I do feel like the way that I think what Jess and I kind of started it together. And I think both of us are really interested in making it something that's like enjoyable and fun. And I think that that's been a really great way to like have other people join in. So like friends that want to come out, or people that want to get out of the city and be at the farm and do a little bit of work. I think that's something to keep in mind. Like I have a hard time sometimes because I get like, oh, we have to like do all this work and get things done. But like trying to come back to like, this also should be something that's fun and enjoyable. And yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Kim, your comment about she's never thought about some of the waste that would be created during seed production, and she loves that you found ways to reduce that waste and provide food for people. Question from Linda. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Zoe. Zoe, so inspiring. Will you try to continue with the model you pursued with Juby in 2020? I love the idea of accessibly priced organic food. Yes, that is something Zoe and I have talked about. Yeah, for sure. And then Nancy is asking about contact details. So maybe it's okay with all the panelists. We can send an email out with the link to the webinar as well as contact details for folks. We'll do that. And then Shannon, what is the name of the Six Nations organization you donated to?
It's funny. I was thinking about that. I was like, I don't even know the name. It's Kitty Liquors is the woman that runs it. And she's just like, I feel like she does so many things. So it's the community garden that's in Sweetman. And they do some really cool stuff where they do like salad in a bag. So you can go and you pay a certain amount for a bag, and then you can go around the garden and pick all of the produce that you'd like to fill the bag. And they do also a bunch of educational work and food boxes, and really just great stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. Avril from the UK, hello. Great project, thanks. And thanks is something with a lot more potential going forward. Yeah, lots of great ideas. And a question from Ginny, are your seeds available to other not-for-profit groups? They could use some nasturtiums. And then a question for me, I guess, is how we found the 5 families. So if you wanted to, are the seeds available for other not-for-profit groups?
Yeah, you should get in touch, because we do most of the seed that we grew for a seed company that we had been contracted to grow for them. So, but we have a lot of seed that we have extra of too. So just depending what it is, I think the nasturtiums we mostly sold, but we might have had some that were like the seconds that like should still be fine. And we have other seeds too. So if you're interested, get in contact.
Great. There's also a question about the contact information for your First Nations contacts as well.
Okay,
so
I can.
Yeah, we'll put it all together and send it an email.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then how we found the 5 families. So with COVID, Environment Hamilton's Good Food Box, we couldn't run it. Our supplier shut down. They're the Halton Fresh Food Box. They do thousands of boxes. They shut down as soon as COVID came, and also our pack site shut down. So Zoe and I were just chatting about food and growing food, and she just mentioned that she had extras and they weren't sure what their distribution would look like. And I was like, wait, I can maybe help with that. I had a small grant to work on a community project, and I thought this would be a great way. So the 5 families are folks, some of them are from, I live in Ward 3, so mostly Ward 3, because then I could just hop on my bike if I had to and do the home deliveries. Yeah, but the 5 families was I think a good number for us. Okay. And then Karen, you have a question about, can you name the seed company? Is your seed going to be marketed under your name?
I don't know I don't actually know if it will be marketed under. It's Hawthorn Seeds. So we grew for Hawthorn Seeds this year, that they're up in Mount Forest area. And then next year we're growing for them and Fruition Seeds, which are in upstate New York.
Nice. Okay, so we're gonna continue on. We'll move on to our next Sorry, hold on. Having technical difficulties. Our next panelist is Deborah. Deborah, do you want me to stop sharing my screen, and do you want to share your screen? Okay, just bear with us with this technical things that we have to do. Okay, so Deborah, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to take a minute and provide some context for my story. First of all, thank you so much for your sharing your experience, Zoe. That was so inspiring. I'm humbled by all of you here today and how much you give of yourselves to help others. And it's very inspiring for me. I have not lived that way for a large part of my life. And but I'm learning. And in July, in the summer of 2018, I started attending community permaculture lab work bees. And that was really my first concerted community volunteer experience. And I'll come back to that because that was really one of the cornerstone things that happened that resulted in this subsequent experience I'm going to share with you. But when I think about March 2020, the middle of March, my young person is, she was 16 at the time, and she and I had been here together for some time at that point. She was not in school. And then I started watching the news and thinking, oh my God, what is happening? And that was probably March the 12th. And then by the middle of the following week, I think it was, the airport shut down. Like under what circumstances could I ever conceive of the airports closing and the borders closing? It was unfathomable to me. And so I'd been here and already had a fair amount of time in with my young person and I just here, and facing another, month. Because at the time I'm talking to friends and it's like, this might last until May. I don't think so, but and June is for sure, it's going to be over by June. We'll be back to normal. And so it was all a bit overwhelming and quite frightening. And so having spent some time with the CPL folks, I'd become much more aware of climate related issues. We'd been working on a property, Cynthia Meyer's property on Winston Avenue, converting it from regular yard to a permaculture edible garden. And so I would hear them talking about various things related to food and growing our own food and sustainability and the importance of doing that. And so in March, when I'm looking at this long number of weeks ahead of uncertainty, I decided that I was going to try my hand at growing edible food. I've lived in this house since 2005 and have had years of growing perennials. Years of perennial production, but no edible food to speak of. And so I started germinating seeds, and I picked up some seeds in February of 2020 from Seedy Saturday, and my friend Ginny, I knew she was going to germinate some tomato seeds for me. So I put out a call to some friends and said, I'm looking for seeds because I'd like to germinate some seeds. And my sister-in-law dropped off 2 packages of William Dam seeds. And I thought, this is great, how generous, unopened. And I looked at the date and they were both dated 2008. And so I thought, well, she should clean out her drawers more often. And as a joke, I put the seeds in just a roasting pan with some soil, and I'm sure every single one sprouted. And so in very short order, my living room, my kitchen, my dining room, my bedroom, my young person and I were overrun with seedlings. I started giving them away. I thought, if these little seeds had the resources to sprout, the least I can do is try to help them along the way. And so when planting season came, I had to find places to put these little seedlings because I couldn't give them away. I couldn't give enough of them away to save every one. So I'm just going to share my screen. And this is sort of where I would say my slideshow starts, just to give you a sense of how this came to look. Pardon me. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
So yes, seedlings galore. This is just one small sample. I didn't even have my own photos. Ginny sent me those photos. It was just like a frenzy of soil and seedlings and trying to find whatever containers I could to set them up in. I thought I'd show you a before. This is the side yard, and the sidewalk runs along the side of my house. So no plant gave up its life for this project. I just want to state that up front. Every perennial was transplanted elsewhere. Because I have a lot of shade on my property, I needed to free up space and really be discerning about what was planted where. So you can see the before is a variety of perennials, and the after became this. So the perennials were replaced, and I love perennials. I am all for feeding the birds and bees and butterflies and wildlife. And I realized that, you know, one of the principles that, or the three ethics that permaculture is based on is earth care, fair share, earth care, people care, and fair share. And so I wanted to not just feed the natural and native habitat, but I guess to consider myself as part of that as well, and people as part of that. So in caring for the earth, we care for all life on earth. And so a lot of soil enrichment went into preparing the soil for this planting, but that is a long story for another time. This is my backyard before. So you can see that I had a few things growing back there. This is a fall shot. So, and that is June of last year. So because I had all of these seedlings, not just tomatoes, although a lot of them were, I needed to find a spot for what I had. And I always had this notion that I had to have like a square rectangular garden somewhere. And I didn't have the space for that. And so learning to make do with what I have, feeling some sense of, I guess, contribution in my own little urban spot has been really, it's really helped me maintain some sense of sanity. Probably not entirely, but more so than otherwise. I'll just say that. So I changed the sand cherry tree to a blueberry bush. Am I at 8 minutes, Juby?
That's 8 minutes.
Oh, okay. I added some comfrey. I'm also very interested in perennial edibles, and so have given some thought to that as well. Here's the front. Here's another shot of the backyard. You can see there's some fiddleheads there for perennial, as a perennial vegetable. They're a great edible. And I'm happy to follow up with anyone who is interested in learning how to eat or prepare Solomon seal and hostas as edibles. This is a potato tower. I'm 5'10" and a half, so that potato tower is actually bigger than you might think. And I doubled my potato production, and that was my first time trying it. So I'm inspired to try my hand at potatoes again. So this was all trying to fit things in to a small space. And I was really interested in just testing anything I could to see what my soil would respond well to. This is a fedge. Ginny suggested that I consider this again a space saver. There's a row of bushes all along the fence line. And so she suggested that I plant cucumber, various squash, climbing vines, and train them to go up over the bushes. And they did very well. It was very pleasing. I had probably, I think 20 butternut squash that grew in various spots across the bushes. This is the front yard. It's not a great photo, but you can see that there are pollinator plants in amongst the vegetables. I wish I could acknowledge my neighbors. I have actually acknowledged my neighbors by leaving food on their doorsteps. Because they have been, for the most part, very supportive of, seeing tomato plants in the front yard. I live on quite a manicured street, so this is very different for them to see. Here's the other side of the front yard. So 4 months prior to this, it was all grass. One of Ginny's Italian saucers. And this is a green stripe cushion. And it just happens to have made a guest appearance today.
Oh, wow.
The largest one, this is a seed from Seedy Saturday. I'd never heard of it before. Planted it on the food hedge. And the largest one I grew was 14.5 pounds. So this squash is just so much fun, isn't it? And if anyone wants seeds, I've got lots.
Wow.
And of course, super easy to grow. So bear in mind, this is my first year gardening, and I could not have done this without help from other people. Like, circling back to the community permaculture lab, being part of them, working along side by side with people who know what they're doing, and then coming back to my own property and just learning as I went was incredibly helpful. As well, they are at the end of the phone for me, essentially, when I run into a problem. It's so much more than just plunking a tomato in the ground. No wonder I didn't have any luck along the way prior to this. I grew potatoes in pots, was very successful. And I did, Cynthia Meyer and I and another CPL member, Steve Watson, did a lot of research into bokashi composting. So we've done quite a bit of research and testing with and it's a very effective way of using food scraps. As far as what's on the horizon, I was talking to Ian Graham the other day and I said, this is not a greenhouse, it's a green hut. This is my little green hut. He has greenhouses, I have this little green hut. And I put it up in the fall for less than $50 to extend my growing season. You'll see real greenhouses in Zoe's presentation, but nonetheless, working with what I have and what I have available to me, this has been a really good test year for that. This is another property I have. One of the, there is some digging involved, but the notion of digging to the extent that I would have had to dig based on what I thought gardening was before, I'm just not like that. That amount of work really makes me just want to take a nap. This is a 12 by 30 foot garden that I started in the fall. So it's preparing for spring planting this year. And it's all sheet mulched. So no soil was turned to start this garden and to prepare this land. Another thing on the horizon, in my front yard, through the CPL, we're designing an edible food forest. Again, building on the notion of perennial vegetables. And the notion is to have a 7-layer food forest in the front yard. This is the Community Permaculture Lab sign in front of Cynthia's. If you want to see a community permaculture garden, hers is a well-established one. And of course, the bounty. I remember I lived on a 200-acre dairy farm until I was 6 years old. I remember when gardening wasn't a hobby, it was a necessity. My parents did it to feed us because that was a primary source of our food all year round. And so this has really been coming back to my roots. And I can hardly describe actually how meaningful it has been to me. And the message I have is just start small. Start with what you have. It all makes a difference. And there are people in the community who are willing to help. I can do it, but I can't do it alone. In fact, Ginny Pierce, who is on this call, and is a member of the Community Permaculture Lab, is hosting a garden planning event on March the 27th. And you can get information on that through the Community Permaculture Lab Hamilton Facebook page. And I would welcome you all to attend, no matter how much earth you have to work with. And with that, I will conclude.
Wow, thanks, Deborah.
Oh, and I want to thank Juby for responding to a call I made to her last August. I said, Juby, would you like to see what I've done? She said, sure. She came on the bus. We were socially distanced, masked up. She was just so excited.
Oh.
She was so excited. It was wonderful. So thank you for the invitation to share my story today.
Deborah, your story is so inspiring, you know, to think that you went from kind of gardening to like full out gardening. Amazing. Before I forget, I just wanted to share a bit of your biography. I didn't do that at the beginning. Deborah is a novice vegetable garden, a rain harvester, a bokashi composter, and a student of all things earth. She's an active member of the Community Permaculture Lab in Hamilton and the Action 13 Growing Together. She lives in Dundas with her wonderful teenager and their beloved cat, Pearl.
Pearl.
Yes. So do we have questions? Let me just pull up the chat.
While we're waiting for questions, I just got a message from Jason Allen, who's mentioned that there's a power outage in Kirkendall. So if there's a lot of people who haven't been able to join us from that part of the city, that could be why.
Okay. Okay.
There's a question from Linda. Oh, was that an older question? How can people join you to help?
Oh, we have through the Community Permaculture Lab, there's a Facebook page, and I'll post my phone number as well. Is that okay? At Woodward. Woodward, the large garden that I mentioned, that's 12 by 30, it's just 2 streets over from where I live, off of South Street in Dundas. And it's really being done to support the local food bank. So in December, I was in touch with Scott Gross, the director of the Salvation Army, and he gave us input into what vegetables would go well, would best meet the needs of people who use the food bank. So that's really exciting for us. So it's a large garden, and if anyone wants to come and learn how to plant vegetables and how to grow vegetables, and most importantly, how to get a yield from vegetables, people are involved who will help you start.
For anybody who's not monitoring the chat, I did post a link to the Facebook page for the Permaculture Lab.
And how to design a food forest.
We can put these links as well into that email that we'll send everybody out with contacts and events. Deborah, there's a question from Avril. Which of the foods would you say is the easiest to grow for novelists or for those with limited space?
That's a really good question. One of the William Dam tomatoes, like the one of the seeds that was 12 years old, grew. It was a determinate tomato, so it didn't need trellising. I just had a cage on it. And one of those plants grew up to like 40 plum tomatoes. It was a huge producer. So I was just using a bathroom scale to weigh my production as I could. So it's just an estimate, but I'm estimating about 160 pounds of tomatoes. So for small space, one of those types of tomatoes would be a good try. Certainly greens, kale, lettuce. The thought in March of 2020 that we might not be able to get what we wanted when we wanted from the store was a huge wake-up call.
Yeah.
That made it so real for me. And so, yeah, I would say any kind of greens, tomatoes, and if you want help, join us. We will help you.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the community and the community permaculture lab folks. Great work, great community minded. There's a question about if there's going to be more virtual events from Ange. So are the community lab, are those events virtual? Yes, they're
Yes,
right? Yeah, okay.
yes.
And then I think I saw, Linda, you had mentioned that you love the potato tower or idea on your hedges. You're going to try that. Great. That's a great space saver.
I'd be glad to help you.
Nice. Okay, so maybe we'll continue on.
So I just wanted to say, we have Zoom meetings, but we also have work bees. So we socially distance and mask up. And that's what was really inspiring for me to participate in the Community Permaculture Lab, because we're not just planning, we're actually doing together.
Yes, amazing.
Please do, Linda.
Great. We'll move on to last but not least, Jim Sweetman. I'm just going to read his bio. Jim has been a resource for our community and gets things done. So it's great to have you here, Jim. Jim was born in Toronto and raised in Burlington. He has a Bachelor of Chemical Engineering degree from McMaster. When he retired in 2006, he focused his energies on various volunteering activities within Hamilton and in Dundas. He chaired the Waste Reduction Task Force for Hamilton for 6 years. With the aim to strengthen community sustainability and resilience, he co-founded the not-for-profit Dundas in Transition to develop and implement 2 food security projects. He is the vice chair of the Dundas Community Services Board for 2 years. He also has an ongoing leadership role in the Dundas Works community organization with the purpose of increasing citizen engagement through projects in local democracy. Jim's personal priorities are maintaining his physical and mental health through activities and relationships with friends and family. So yes, thank you, Jim, for being with us. I'll just hand it off to you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you as well for the opportunity to participate in this today. I'd certainly like to thank Zoe and Deborah for, man, you just want to get out in the dirt again. I'm looking out in my yard. Most of the snow's gone, but it does make you want to play in the dirt. Thank you so much for all those wonderful photographs. That was great to see the work you guys have done. I don't have any photos to share and I don't have any slides, so I'll just share some thoughts for a few minutes. I don't want to presume everyone knows what the Good Food Box is, so just very quickly, in Dundas, at our food box, we operate on the 4th Friday of every month. We have a food supplier who goes to the Ontario food terminal, picks up 12 different food items in bulk, so 50-pound bags and cases of fresh food, vegetables, and some fruits, and brings them back to the Salvation Army in a food bank in Dundas. And then normally with a group of volunteers, we then take that stuff and put it into, they call it Good Food boxes, some are bags, but put it into orders that are then delivered to people. About 1/3 of the boxes we produce are donations. They're given to, let's just say, individuals that are experiencing some disadvantage in the community. And then the other 2/3 are people who purchase the boxes outright. We typically do about 100 boxes a month. And so that's enough volume that it makes it worth the trip for our food supplier to go to the Ontario terminal. We're not the only ones that do this. Juby's already mentioned that the Environment Hamilton runs a program, or when they can, they run one. I know there's one at Grace Lutheran out in Westdale. There's one at Trinity Lutheran, and I'll probably forget somebody and apologize for that. I know there's at least 20 others operating in towns across Ontario, so we can't claim any original thought here. Let me give you some, I just want to give you a little context to, why we're operating this program. So back in 20, you mentioned Dundas in transition. So 2009, 2010, many of you know Dave Carson, I'm sure. He does all kinds of work with Hamilton Street 50 and EH and all kinds of Rotary, all kinds of other things. Anyways, we were learning about this transition town movement that had started in Totnes, England. And the whole purpose was to try to make communities more resilient and more sustainable. We talked about peak oil back then, and of course, climate change. So we got involved in that transition town, and I look back, we didn't even know what we didn't know, but it just was very interesting. And this notion of community resilience I think that was the thing that attracted both Dave and I to this thing. It just something resonates with us. And definition of resilience is the ability to adjust and adapt to disturbances. I'll use that word. And so back then we were learning about disturbances. So we had climate change and depletion of many resources and materials and habitats and species. It actually could get quite depressing when you started to learn about all the different disturbances that were going on. So we were a little more aware of things. And then in the fall of 2010, there was a seminar in Dundas called Poverty in the Valley. And that's where we first met a number of key people in the community. I remember Linda Lukasik was there, Karen was there. I think we met you there, Juby, or it was shortly thereafter that we did. So we came away from that, and it was quite eye-opening what was going on in our community with respect to, I guess this was where I first understood the terms food security and the number of people that were disadvantaged in that way. And so we had learned of Karen's project, and EH, Environment Hamilton, was looking to start a good food box. And because it was just, we had two retired guys, and anyways, we started in January of 2011, and I know Karen and Julie started in March. Not that, we're saying anything about who was first, but just, So we operated for 110 consecutive months running the Good Food program in Dundas until COVID-19. So we stopped we finished January and February in 2020, and then we took a break in March. And we were out of action for about 6 months. And then we resumed again in September of 2020. And then we kind of retooled the program that I'll talk about here shortly in January of this year, 2021. We're already in 2021. So So one of the questions you asked was, so what have we learned? Well, one of the things we now can add global pandemic to the list of disturbances. If the list of challenges wasn't long enough, we weren't really talking about a pandemic. We'd seen SARS had happened, and there was MERS and a couple of other things, but like I think it was Deborah alluded to, I didn't see this one coming at all. So the global pandemic is yet another reason why we need resilience in our communities. So the challenges we've had to overcome really haven't been that significant, if I could say, because it's really just the problem is the food terminal didn't close, thankfully, even though the borders were closed to travel. It didn't get serious enough that they were closed to commerce. So because we should all be aware, I'll come back to this a little bit later, but Ontario's imports $4 billion worth of food. $4 billion worth of food. There's an expression, 9 meals from anarchy. There's about 9 meals of inventory. Enough food in Ontario, there's about 9 meals of inventory. And then if that border ever got closed permanently, we're in a world of hurt from the standpoint of food. So we were fortunate that that kept going. So the Ontario Food Terminal was still in operation, so our supplier could go there. Was easy enough that they could distance and mask and do all the good things. But what it did to us is we weren't able to bring all the volunteers together to pack the food boxes, and all of the volunteers, let's say they all have gray hair, and so we're in that demographic that we have to be careful, right? So we went with much fewer volunteers, and when I say we retooled the program, we've started to distribute or provide bulk food to the food bank, so that 30% of the clients, they can still access fresh food, but they come to the food bank, which is still open with all the masking and distancing and all that good stuff. And the food bank can then distribute the fresh food to them. So we don't put it together in bags anymore and deliver it that way. We still are, similar to what Juby described, we still are delivering some food. There are members in our community that you know, just aren't able to get out. They have mobility and accessibility stuff. So there's still some people that we're delivering to, but not as extensively as we were. We hope when everybody gets vaccinated and things straighten around, we'll fire back up and we'll be back in normal. So, but I think I think we were fortunate in getting this thing going. There's an expression I love. It's called dig your well before you're thirsty. And so we were able to, you know, because we went back to 2010 and learned about that stuff, and we started to do a bunch of things in 2011, that we were able to, you know, we've built connections and networks and identified assets and resources throughout the community that when this pandemic hit, we didn't have to sit and go, uh-oh, what are we going to do? We have no clue. It was kind of like, all right, well, that's going to cause this and that, but yeah, no need to shut this whole thing down. We weren't starting from a blank page. So, you know, there's so many solutions out there. I think we just have to get out there and implement them and try them. And so fortunately for us, we had learned about this food box a number of years ago. And so it really hasn't been that difficult to keep going. The difficulty's been, we've lost the connection with all the volunteers. Like our packing day, it's just so much fun. I mean, you get a bunch of people there and there's always kibitzing. There's great friendships have developed. I mean, we've been running this for, like I say, 110 months, and we've had volunteers that have been there for 109 of them. So, you know, we have great fun, and I've shared in some of the packings with Juby and Karen, and it's always a great time. So we've lost that, but the connections have maintained. People keep asking us, when are we starting again? We want to volunteer, and as soon as we're able, we're going to have one heck of a party. So we're looking forward to that. Let me just shift to the last one. I want to be mindful of the time. You said, what activities, what opportunities do we see on the horizon? I think this whole thing about food security and is really about, it's kind of like shortening the distance between the people that produce the food and the people that consume the food. So just back to that notion of the border again. I mean, so much of our food is being brought in by, you know, great long distances, and that's a vulnerability that is definitely a threat to how sustainable our communities can be, and that's why we need to build some resilience against it. So when you see what Deborah and Zoe have been doing and are doing with growing food, it's just so important that we exploit all opportunities like that. So what opportunities do I see? First of all, I think it's mentioned, let me also support that. The loss of agricultural land. Like, what could be more fundamental than that if we pave over where we grow our food? So the notion of expanding the urban boundary, I just cannot understand under what circumstance that's something we should be doing. It's crazy and it's madness, and so we all have to get a little angry about that, and let's make sure that doesn't happen. So here's the things I would say. So if I got to do some stuff, I think we need more of these good food box programs operating across the city. We do 100 boxes. It's a very scalable thing. You can, you need about 15 volunteers and a supplier. It's just not a complicated system. But back to that shortening the distance between the people that produce it and the people that consume it. I'd like to see the Good Food Box as, no disrespect to the Ontario Food Terminal, and that's where we go now, but I'd love to see our program sourced from people like Zoe, maybe even people like Deborah, if we had enough front yards and backyards. I mean, it should really be local food. So that's another opportunity for us when I look around our community. As long as we don't pave it all, we could really supply a lot of food. I'd like to see more culturally diverse food in the food box. I know there's a number of items that we have that might appeal to some diets and not to others. So I think that's another opportunity, and maybe that's where on a small scale we can be growing those special herbs and vegetables that some cultures like. Maybe that's a way we could all get to know each other too. I think we need more food co-ops like the mustard seed across the city. That's promoting and extending local food. I think they've reached a scale. I saw at their last AGM, their sales are about 2 million. They're not going to be a threat to Galen Weston just yet, but I think if we could, if we had a number of those stores across the city, that would be a very good thing. I think we could use things like bulk buying clubs, where we could, we don't have to go the full extent of the mustard seed, but we could certainly get more local food into the system. We need more community gardens and urban farms. I think I'd like to see more food gardens and fewer single-purpose sports fields in our parks. Maybe we've reached peak soccer fields and we could put some gardens in. I think we need gardens in our schoolyards. Maybe we could teach our children about cooperation and collaboration and empathy and compassion through gardening. I'd like to see a significant reduction in food waste as well. I think there's an opportunity in our community. Maybe there's a social enterprise or something we could do there to, when we've got so many people hungry and yet there's so much food being wasted, there's got to be an opportunity there. So anyways, those are just a few thoughts on what's emerged out of the Good Food program that we're operating. And looking at the clock, I need to be quiet now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. It was very heartening to see that you were able to get the Dundas Good Food Box up and running. Yes, people need food. Just looking at the chats, Jim, I think this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Do you mean that Ontario is not self-sustaining in food production? That's from Cynthia. And yeah, not the way we're going, especially when we're thinking about taking our prime agricultural farmlands and turning them into rows of houses. And then Jim from Nancy says, sounds like Jim would be a star delegator at City Hall. Hello. Here's a big question from Ginny. How can we make one small step towards Good Food Box transition to locally grown, not Toronto sources?
Well, one of it's not just as simple, but one of the things we're fighting against is we've been conditioned to think that food should be cheap, and this whole notion of fully costed food, that the people that grow it should get a fair wage, that the people that harvest it should get a fair wage. We won't get off into the use of people that come from other countries to harvest our food for us. But there's just when we go to the food markets in the, when the farmers markets, pardon me, when they're open, and I've got a number of neighbors and say, oh, it's just so expensive. And there's just a whole lot of education we have to do, I think, around this whole notion that food has to be so cheap so that we got money to buy other stuff. And when we tried to source it to give a fair return to the local farmers, we then started to run into issues about being able to provide the food free of charge for other people. So right now, it's at least, it's seasonal, obviously, but we try to hit about 80% of our food boxes, at least grown in Ontario. Yeah, we got to figure that one out. I don't have the answer to that. It's largely driven by price. I don't think it's availability, but we got to keep working on that.
Yes, definitely a big question. There are a couple of questions. Ginny asked, how do people sign up and find out about the Good Food Box? And Ellie asked, how often do you deliver your food boxes?
Most of the programs I'm aware of, we operate once a month. Grace Lutheran runs on the first Tuesday. Ours is the fourth Friday. I think Juby's, yours was the third Wednesday. So we've tried to spread them. There's one a week roughly running in the city. Sorry, there was two parts to that question. I forgot the other one.
Yes. How do people sign up and find out?
Oh, yes. And then again, kudos to, still goes back to Karen and Juby. If you go on the Environment Hamilton website, there's on the left side in the menu there, it talks about a food box. If you click on that, you'll get all kinds of information of the locations and the coordinators. And I'm in there. I believe my name's still on there, so you can send me an email and we'll get you connected.
Yeah. So we've got more comments and questions, but maybe we'll open up to all the panelists. There's one question here about food waste. What are you doing to keep food waste to a minimum regarding your supplies, please? So maybe as gardeners or as Good Food Box coordinators, how are you dealing with food waste? Any thoughts?
Just a clarification on the question, or perhaps not. I'll assume that there are a couple components to food waste. There's growing in excess and having wastage that is not edible for whatever reason, pest infestation, etc. And for that, we use bokashi. Bokashi composting. We've got to do some growing testing with it next year, but there's a lot of indicators that suggest that it is a really good soil enricher. And I like it because it's an accelerated process. With regular compost bin, it takes maybe 4 to 6 months to get a usable product for the soil. In bokashi, we can have a usable product in 4 weeks. It has to rest in the soil for 2 weeks after that and then plant. So it's very efficient that way. Jim, did you want to respond to?
Well, my understanding, it's a huge question, but I keep coming back to, we got to shorten the distance between the people that produce it and the people that eat it. So the food system now, when you're shipping stuff in from other countries and across borders, there's a great lag time in that. There's storage, there's inventorying, there's transporting. So there's all kinds of opportunity for spoilage. And that's where we lose a great deal of the food across the system. So I think it's the closer you can produce it to where you're going to consume it, there's going to be less waste. So we have to move from where we are to something closer to that. I understand the logistics, or I can appreciate the logistics of trying to feed cities with 7 and 8 million people in them, but somewhere between what we're doing now and growing it in your backyard, there's a sweet spot that could have a significant impact. I also think we need to, you know, where there has been some overproduction, we need to figure out how to know about that, learn about that, and then exploit that before it goes to waste. So I'm certain there's things we could do with maybe a little better cooperation and communication, and we could make sure that food doesn't get wasted.
Zoe, did you have?
Yeah, I think one thing, like I agree with Jim about like how can we shorten that distance? And in my experience of what happened in COVID, I thought it was really amazing to see how much discussion there was around this idea of mutual aid, around how can we connect with the people in our neighborhoods, the people that live next door to us. How do we like support each other from on that level, on the, you know, the smallest scale level up, as opposed to going up and down. And then how does that change things for all of us, that we start to see other ways that people are living? We have to find different ways of doing things and support each other. So I think thinking about that and is one way, because we all have, you know, there's so many, just like trying to get seedlings or seeds for different projects last season seemed like, you know, everyone has more than they need once they start growing them, like your 12-year-old tomato seeds, you know, it's like are those things, and it's about the distribution. How do you get them to people? And then I think the other thing that just I was thinking about is was reading an article by Paul Taylor in Toronto. He's the head of food chair and a food activist. And he was talking about, you know, it's also not that we don't have enough food, it's that we don't have, like, people don't have the resources, right? So there's also the issue of inequality in the food system. And so also as people that are growing, I think for me, it's important to also think about how to redistribute those resources as well. So if that's like redistributing land so that people can grow their own food that might not have had access to land, or if it's redistributing financial resources, also thinking about that, because there is food, it's just that people don't have the resources. Some people don't have the resources and other people do. So yeah.
Yes, and I think there's a comment here from Kim about growing food and just like paying for food, Jim, what you were saying earlier about, and she was wondering if more people tried growing their own food, if they would be more willing to pay a fair price for the food. I guess, you know, just seeing how much effort, how much, you know, a lot of, when you're growing something, not all of it looks picture perfect. They're not all the same sizes. They're not all, you know, amazing, and just, but they're still completely, totally fine to eat. It's just that we are accustomed to seeing complete uniformity in our produce section. So yes, there's just a quick question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So just thinking about, there's an affordability question. Someone asked if organic is better, but that she finds it pricey. And this is the contradiction that we're all working to manage, because the organic ways of growing that are better for the planet and better for our bodies are not financially accessible to everybody, or that there could be barriers to making things more accessible. Not everybody can participate physically in a community garden. So I think what we need to do is, yes, there are neighborhood solutions, you know, people trade, people are generous. This is a theme that I keep seeing again and again. I'm seeing local buying clubs, but I'm also seeing a role for municipalities here, and for funders, and for the corporate sector to start thinking about food differently. And you know, some of us who were concerned about peak oil back then were saying that people are just going to go on business as usual until there's a great disruption that forces people to think and act differently. Well, guess what? COVID is giving us this opportunity to shift a lot of our assumptions about food. We can't treat it like a commodity anymore. We can't treat it like it's something that if you can't afford your own, then you're on your own, or you're forced to go into the not always dignified emergency food system. So Good Food Box was an attempt to get that kind of shift underway and to sort of build connections with local producers and shorten those links between producers and consumers. But we could also look at solutions from outside that have already been tried. I love what Jim said. What was it? Dig your well before you're thirsty. Other communities are doing the digging for us. We can learn from what's happened in Cuba as they adapted to the shortage of oil back in the late 90s. We can look at the Belo Horizonte in Brazil, which is a globally recognized leader in municipal interventions in food systems to make things more accessible and affordable for all. So they do things like the municipality will subsidize certain key staples and make them available at an affordable price for everyone. They have these things called the Restaurant Popular, which is like, if you can imagine a giant cafe with long tables where everybody can sit down and everyone pays the same very modest price for good, healthy, sustainable, health promoting foods. So if we shift our thinking, that will allow more solutions to come into place, because these small neighborhood systems, like Jim was saying, the mustard seed isn't going to put Fortinos out of business, but we need to find that in between space so more people can eat well and have access to the kinds of foods that will carry us forward and through this crisis and build something better.
Absolutely. I think maybe we should end with this one big question here from Shannon. She says the conversation is so important, that she's a farmer and with their greenhouse, they produce excess and they have no extra time to figure out where to put that. And it kills her to compost it all. So does anyone have any suggestions or ideas for fast and simple ways to connect with individuals or community groups or other farms? Is there a food security Facebook group and existing forums or platforms, I guess, for a space so that they can just hand off the extras and it be redistributed?
Sounds like somebody needs to build that if it doesn't already exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this last year, Juby, I think a lot, because we were also working on this idea of like a yard sharing project where people could grow in people's backyard. People that had yards could share their yards with people who wanted to grow. And then we were thinking, well, how do people get the resources to be able to do the growing? And then realizing there's all these places that there are these resources, and how do you get them to people? So we were like, could you have like just like a pop-ups, like one place everyone brings their seedlings, or I don't know, because yeah, it was also difficult during COVID. Have someone's, like, I know Juby was doing a seed project, and I had some seeds on my porch, and people would come pick up seeds there. But Shannon, I will talk to you if you have seedlings, because I know caremongering, once they find a space, we'll be looking for seedlings. So yeah.
And we'll need some for some of the work we're doing at St. Matthew's House. We're already talking to the people at the McQuestion Urban Farm, but hey, we're online if you want to find us. But we can also build on some of the learning that's already in place. We have Russ Ort's Backyard Harvest, which has evolved over the years and has done a lot of learning about how to connect neighbors and neighborhood growing environments. And maybe there's something that we could gain by having him be part of these types of conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this has been incredibly amazing and inspiring. It's just so good, the three of you doing the great work that you're doing. Karen, the amazing work, your razor focus on helping seniors. The folks in our chats, the comments, the questions, so much good stuff is happening in our city. And I just, sometimes the work you don't remember, you forget that there are people just alongside, and we're all just working hard to try and make the city as best as we can. So thank you so much. I don't have words to share how appreciative and grateful I am for this moment. But just looking at the time, I think it might be time to wrap up, unfortunately. But thank you to Jim, Deborah, Zoe, Your stories are inspiring, amazing, beautiful. Thank you to everyone who joined. Karen, it's been a pleasure. Great to reconnect over food.
Great working with you again. It's been
Yes.
too long.
Yes. Okay, so I'll send out that email with the link to this webinar to everyone, just in case for folks who couldn't make it. Hopefully that power outage in Kirkendall gets resolved soon. I'll send links and contact information to all 5 of us, if everyone's okay with that. And then people can get in touch with who you'd like to get in touch with. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Amazing
Thank
panel. And
you.
thank you for the
Thank you.
participants. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inspiring me today.
All right, bye.
Bye, everybody.